So let's answer those questions. We were back to TTIP. The question from James, I think, was: is subsidiarity a hollow concept? And I think also, how do you enforce it? How do you practically enforce subsidiarity? And is the European Parliament again the right place to do it? Perhaps is there other ways of doing it? For example, the red card idea, which is big here in the UK. And then the final question, I suppose, is one about really differentiates between free movement of workers and abuse of welfare. Yeah, and different impact of TTIP. The two-pronged question. One was on the substance of the opposition. Is it ISDS? Is it this idea of regulatory convergence? And the second question was also the impact of TTIP in different parts of Europe. Is it a blanket benefit to everyone, or is it differentiation in impact? Who wants to go first? David, you want to start?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I took to Andrea's first. I mean, our estimates are that a TTIP deal would mean 119 billion euro a year boost to the EU economy. In terms of ordinary families, as consumers, they would have access to US goods more cheaply, partly because tariffs would be coming off, partly because harmonisation or mutual recognition of regulatory standards would enable producers to cut their prices to a transatlantic market where they were able to produce to a single standard rather than two standards. In terms of European producers, I mean, they would get better access to the American market. I think it is very important. This is a tricky, difficult one, you know, on the American side. We get access to public procurement in the United States to a much greater extent than is the case today. That would open the way, I think, to contractors and subcontractors from all parts of Europe to get a bigger share of American business. So I think this is a win-win. And those countries in Central Europe and to some extent Southern Europe that either are modernising their economies or introducing sorts of demanding structural reforms will actually be in the position to adapt very, very quickly to those opportunities in the American market and seize those. But unless we get the trade barriers swept away, that won't happen. On James's points about employment, yeah, and I rather agreed with the point that he made. I do find, I mean, you know, I don't want to boast because we've got a way to go in this country still, but I do find a number of ministerial counterparts, you know, are looking at the fact that, you know, British employment rates are so high, and looking at the fact we have a more flexible labour market than most other European countries, and drawing some lessons from it. I think, in fairness, it's not a split between countries. You said yourself there's a difference in approach between the left and the centre-right in Europe on this question. How do you make a reality of subsidiarity and so on? This is when you get right down into the weeds about institutional and procedural changes, so that you're not just looking at a list of things that you say should be withdrawn or amended, although that is important, so refit, the Juncker Timmermans plan to withdraw up to 80 measures, you know, that is all important, but you also need to introduce checks and balances to shift the working culture. So stronger, more rigorous impact assessments at all stages of a measure, not just right at the beginning, very important. I do think strengthening the power of national parliaments, you know, having a broader grounds on which the yellow card be tabled, the Commission saying if X number of parliaments object, we will in practice treat it as a veto and drop the proposal. I like the Dutch idea that national parliament should be able to come back later in the legislative process and have their view. I like the idea that national parliament should be able to force the Commission to review a policy. Say, well, you legislated for this 5 years ago. We actually think it's net damaging rather than net helpful. Please go away and have another look at it and tell us what you think. Those sorts of changes, I think, would all be useful and constructive and make an incremental difference. On the point about freedom of movement, it really is not just UK. I mean, talk to any Labour member of Parliament in the House of Commons about what they are finding on the doorstep in working class areas of British cities, north and south. And they say this is a real issue. And there is a difference between the recent historical experiences of the UK and Germany. And Stefan described how Germany's population had been diminishing, and there's a need for immigration for the labour market. Between the 2001 census and the 2011 census, the UK population went up 2 million. The demographers tell us that on current trends, we overtake Germany around 2040 in terms of population. It'll make some very interesting discussions about representation and weighted majority voting at the European Parliament. But that means, yes, most of those people, whether they're coming from Europe or whether, as about half of them are, coming from outside Europe, they're working, they're paying taxes, but it also means, particularly in certain towns and cities, intense pressure on public services and a demand in terms of the rapid integration of significant numbers of people, which I think it is a challenge for any society to manage. We're dealing with very large numbers of people in quite a short space of time. And you even for those of us who would class ourselves as sort of quite liberal-minded on these issues of integration and racial equality, there is a genuine issue about integration and how we go about that. And the freedom of movement issue and the migration question will generally play into that.
Thank you, Stefan.
Concerning TTIP, certainly the opposition in Germany concerning TTIP isn't only based on anti-American feelings and emotions. Certainly there are crucial points. They have to be discussed, and I'm not naive at all. Certainly I know that the USA isn't pushing forward this topic only because of altruistic reasons. And I wouldn't say I'm in favor of TTIP on any price. Certainly there are hard discussions now going on, and I don't think that the ambitious goal will be reached that we will have an end of the discussion in the end of this year. I would say it lasts longer, perhaps much longer, but I hope not too long, because I think especially small and medium-sized enterprises in Germany who are very export-oriented and very oriented on the USA, they could benefit a lot. When I talk to the entrepreneurs, they tell me it's means for them a lot of a big increase of costs if they want to make the same tool they have on the European market for the American market. It's not the big topic for BMW and Daimler and Siemens. Certainly they also would benefit from TTIP. But I lay the focus on the small and medium-sized enterprises like Trumpf or others, and they could benefit a lot. But ISDS certainly it's discussed very intensively in Germany, and certainly I know that the idea of ISDS was that there was if there were doubts on the principle of rule of law if it is fulfilled in certain countries, and I don't have any doubts on the principle of rule of law in the USA. But when I talk to members of the board of big German companies, they tell me that they are in favor of an ISDS because they don't want to rely on a certain court in a state in the European in the USA, and they don't think that they are too independent. So they would rely much more on a ISDS, perhaps here in London. And so if we could do the same regulation on ISDS we now have in the CETA agreement, I would be totally satisfied because the CETA, the ISDS and the CETA agreement, it's okay. It doesn't allow any damages, perhaps, for instance, on the only perspective of a revenue. You have to have an actual damage to have the chance to get damages. So certainly there are a lot of discussions going on and a lot of stones on the path, also concerning certain branches, sectors. The culture sector certainly is a very sensible one. The defensive sector is a sensible one. But I think if the negotiations are held from the European perspective in a good way, in the end, Germany and Great Britain could benefit a lot from TTIP. And I totally agree with David on the political dimension. If we don't succeed and we don't have a positive result on TTIP, we will push the Americans in the hands of the Asian countries. So that's the clear position. So concerning subsidiarity. I'm much in favor of this. As you know, I come from Bavaria, and the Bavarians, they are like, I would say, like the Scottish in the UK. So we don't want independence.
But you're net contributor.
But we are federalists. I know that's not very popular if you say you are a federalist here in the UK, but certainly you are right. It's mentioned a lot of times by politicians. We want to strengthen the principle of subsidiarity, and in the end, mostly it's done in another way. But I just want to say this: I think everyone has to concentrate on stressing more on the regional and national level. And I think the European idea only can be successful in the end if the principle of subsidiarity is really fulfilled.
I promised William a quick question down there, I think. If you're very quick, you might get some...
Well, it would be a shame if we didn't take the opportunity to ask something about the how this settlement might be arrived at, the referendum question, and particularly since, David Lidington, your remarks were very clearly in two categories: the achievable by negotiation on free movement and on welfare issues and so on, and those which are much more of principle to do with the powers of the Council and national parliaments in the institutional arrangements. So would you say a word about how this settlement might be arrived at 28 in the time frame we have, which is 2017? And it would be very interesting to hear Mr. Meyer's view.
Was that also a question about the treaty change? Did I sort of notice the subtext there? So we waited until 10 a.m. sharp to ask the treaty change. Yeah, no, it's very good. I wondered where would we sort of end without asking the big question, the big T-led question. So it's just a matter of 1 minute each, and you agree. So
to be frank, I hoped I
could.
could avoid this word of treaty change. It didn't succeed. No, I think a treaty change is quite difficult to get 28 member states on the same under one head. So, as I mentioned, I'm much in favor of changing EU secondary law, especially concerning the very important topic of regulation, of regulating immigration. But I wouldn't stress too much on the wish or on the demand of a treaty change within the next years. I think it won't be possible. But I think a lot of things could and should be possible on a lower level, as I mentioned, on the EU secondary law level.
David?
I've always thought that you could do a great deal of what is in Bloomberg and the November speech last year without treaty change, through legislation and through political will. Certainly true of all the economic stuff. I think even things like national parliaments, you know, if the Commission were to announce tomorrow, we will treat this number of reasoned opinions as tantamount to a veto, that they have the power to do that. I would also then say, well, once you've established that principle, it's common sense you codify it in the treaties the next time the treaties are formally reopened. I do think that there will be a need for some treaty change. I've always seen the years 2015, 16 as the natural window of opportunity in the European timetable, because in 2017 you've got a French presidential election and then a German federal election. And once you get into 18, 19, you're sort of heading towards the end of the term of the Parliament and the Commission with all the slowdown which that involves. But I'm not believed that you'd be able to get through 28 national ratifications in that space of time. And I rather suspect that our partners, whatever the mix of means for the various ingredients of the new settlement, will say to us, well, okay, we've done this now, we'd rather like you to go away and take your decision, please, before we bother our parliaments or our electors with the detailed ratification measures. So I don't think that'd be too unreasonable of me. So I think I remain optimistic. I don't think that it is sort of a question of everything done and dusted by July this year. I think that there will need to be a serious, hard-headed negotiation, but we're looking forward to engaging that in a constructive fashion.
Well, thank you very much. And of course, there may be one treaty change before 2017 relating to a completely different country and a completely different issue. But thank you very much indeed for coming along this morning. Thank you, Stefan, so much for agreeing to talk to us, and David as well. Safe flight back, Stefan, and no doubt the conversation around the great and soon to be approached Anglo-German bargain on EU reform will continue. Thank you very much.